Hello everyone, it's Becky from Ivy's Corner. I am going to do a tile today. I have recently posted some mini mono tangle videos for a few different of my favourite tangle, I've recently posted some mini mono tangle videos which hopefully you saw and enjoyed, and I thought I would put all of them together in a little tile for you. I haven't really got a plan, so I'm kind of going to just wing it and see how it goes. And I think that that's quite fun when it comes to Zentangle, to be honest. So here we go. I have a lovely white tile here. I have my pencil, my Zentangle pencil. I have a tortillon, and I of course have my Micron PN pen. But we're going to start, as we always do in Zentangle, by just having a moment for gratitude and appreciation. Just to take a few deep breaths and think of something or hold something in our minds that we are thankful for today. And so we can take a few breaths in and out. Okay, so I'm going to start by doing our normal dots and a border. So I'm going to go fairly heavy-handed on that just so that you can see it on the recording. And just defining a little bit of space in which we're going to place those tangles today. I'm actually not going to do a string, I don't think. I'm going to use sort of placing the tangles almost like a string. So the first tangle I'm going to place is going to be Umble. I'm only going to do a few Umble bands, I think. Let's see how we go. So I'm going to start off by doing a band in the corner here. Now, as I said, I haven't really planned this. I'm not sure how it's going to turn out, but we'll discover together as we go. And I do think that that's kind of part of the joy of Zentangle. As I was recording the mini versions of these videos, I was thinking about how the tangles that I did would fit together in a tile. And I sort of had this in my head as I was doing them. So we'll see how it works out. But I'm just going to ink in this band. I might skip forward ahead because it's going to take a little while. So I'm just going to also use the centre inking in just to thin out my aura a little, because my auras don't match so well from when I first drew them, but that's fine. This is the beauty of inking in. You can always add more ink. So that's my first Umble band. I'm going to add another, but I'm not going to turn up and do all the corners. I'm just going to sort of see how we go. Well, I'm doing a corner here, but I'm not going to make it match. It's going to be a little bit random. So that's my next one. I think I'm going to draw them all in, and then I'm going to ink it in one go. Just a nice fine aura there for the Umble. And you can see it on this one. The first one I did my band aura on this side, and the second one I'm doing inside the ribbon. And you can do either, depending on where you want them to sit. I might do a small one here, or smaller, because I do want to make sure I'm leaving plenty of space elsewhere on the tile for the other things I'm going to be placing. So there's that one, and then I think I'm going to do a larger one that's coming from here. And I do want to have a few, because in classic sort of Umble, they do overlap a lot and things drop behind, so I think it's important to make sure I retain a bit of that sort of classic drawing behind. But I'm going to place these tangles now, and I'm sort of going to use them a bit like a string. Like, these are the guidelines of where the other tangles I'm going to draw will go. So I don't want it to be too overpowering because it's going to be such a dramatic tangle. Let's do a big one here. I'm actually making them a little bit finer than I started off because I just want to make sure that I don't overpower the tile, and I do have plenty of space left to draw in later. But that's fine, there's nothing to say that they have to be the same thickness or width. There's nothing to say anything has to be a certain way in Zentangle at all. I'm going to do another looping here, I think. And this idea just sort of came to me as I was doing the mini versions of the tangles that I posted, because I was thinking about how I could make them work together, and I haven't practiced it. I've just gone straight in with recording, so you will be the first to know how this pans out. But as I said, there's no such thing as doing things wrong when it comes to Zentangle drawing. Right, so I'm going to ink in the rest of these bands, so feel free to pause the video and I'll see you on the other side. So here we go. I have reached the end of my Umble here. I've filled in all my inky bits. Some of my auras are quite fine. But you know, I think I'm actually just going to fill in this aura and make it a little bit thicker because it did feel a little bit too skinny for me. You can't really make them bigger, but I can make this inked in area a bit thicker and then add an additional aura. And that is the way you can, you know, when it comes to Zentangle, you can just add little bits here and there or change things to do things a bit differently. There we go. That feels a little bit more sturdy. So here we go. I've done my Umble. And if you've seen the mini tangles that I did, the next one I was going to add in was going to be Fife. And I want to do my Fife fairly big, but obviously I've got lots of these Umbles in the way, so I'm going to have to use my imagination a little bit. I'm going to put my dot grid and I'm going to do it fairly big, and I'm not going to do it equally. I'm just going to kind of, I mean, I wouldn't say it's going to be a crazy Fife, but maybe we could do crazy Fife. But I'm sort of placing my dots, there'd be one behind here, so that it's going to be sort of sat behind our Umble, and it's going to be fairly big. So I'm going to start off, I'll start off with this one because this one here is a completed seed shape. I'm going to do, well, this one's a fairly chunky one, but I want to do them not too massively chunky, these seeds, because I want to make sure I do have some space behind them. This one's going off the edge here, and this one is going to tuck behind here. You can see this one here, I sort of hollyboard it behind the Umble. And I'm going to do this one coming in here. And this one will bring it to here. Sort of disappearing behind. And there's the other one there. And then this one's going to go that way. And this one will join its little friend over here, but I'm going to keep it off of, disappearing off of the tile behind the border, and this one's friend would be up here somewhere. So we've done the ones that way. I'm going to turn my tile and do my seed shapes this way. So this first part of it is going to disappear behind here and join its friend over here. And this one is going to be a complete one. This one's tucking behind this Umble. It's so fun when you start out with just a handful of tangles. You don't really know what's going to happen, but that's part of the fun, I think. You can be super structured and planned about things, and there's definitely a time and a place for that, but I actually quite like the unpredictability of that you can sometimes have with just throwing a bunch of stuff together and seeing what sort of thing you can create that you weren't expecting. This one would come here, and this one here. And I think that's all of those. So now I'm going to add my diagonal seed shapes in, and I think I'm just going to do them all in the same direction, the same orientation. So starting, coming out of the, well, in this orientation, the bottom left hand corner of my section, curving round. Again, I don't want to make these too enormous because I want to retain some space in the kind of in-between areas. I'm not going to have loads, but we'll see how it goes. It's a very skinny one, and this one would come pretty much fully behind there, I think. This one is getting a bit tricky now to see where things would go, but let's assume it comes there, and this one would come maybe around here. But it's just a sort of an idea of it, really, we're after. And now I'm going to do the other diagonal, so holly boring underneath these spaces. So drawing behind, drawing behind, and here. Just pausing when we reach a line. And bringing it underneath. Little idea of one there. This one disappears off there, I think. This is going to be one of the only ones sort of that you'll be able to see more of. I'm aiming for this point down here. Feel free to go a lot slower than I am on this. I am going fairly speedily, but just take your time. As ever with Zentangle, it's just a case of identifying where you think the points are that you would be drawing. This one here is disappearing behind. This one would come in here. But you know, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. So I've got my Fife drawn behind my Umble. I think what I'm going to do now is add my Indyrella into these little spaces here. And they are going to be quite teeny tiny, but I can probably just fit one at a time, I think, into each space. So I've done my first dot, and now I'm going to bring my Indyrella round here. And I've chosen to go for that first spot there because to me it felt like it's in the centre, so pointing to the centre. But I mean, you could do it a little bit more randomly. You could have one coming down this way, one coming down this way. See how you go. See what takes your fancy. But this is really making use of, as this is almost sort of a background texture. And actually, if you had a different colour pen, it would be quite interesting to see how this came together if you used like a lighter grey pen. I do have one of those, so maybe I'll have a little experiment with it in the future. I do like the grey pen. But obviously any of these lessons and videos that I do, you can just do your own twist on it, use some different supplies, see what you can change or tweak, and do whatever takes your fancy, really. I think this is going to look kind of cool. this one's disappearing underneath that umble there. It might be that when I come to shade this that I don't actually shade the Indyrella as I normally would, and I shade it more just as a general background, so it does just look like a sort of a texture. But we'll see in a moment. So that's that centre section done. I'm going to speed ahead and just add my other ones in now, so feel free to pause and finish yours off. But I'll see you in a second when I've filled the rest of my Fife spaces in. Do just be careful and think before you place your ink. That's my recommendation for this one, because sometimes it can be confusing when you've got lots of underneath and weaving things to see, you know, the next place that you should go. So just take your time and think it through before you begin to draw, so you don't accidentally draw into a Fife shape. Okay, so there we have it. That's my Indyrella tucked inside my Fife. And I think now it's time to shade, although what I am going to do is just add some little hatching into my Fife, because I do think it looks quite effective and it's a nice thing to do before you shade. I mean, you can do it after you shade as well, but just in each of the corners of these little seed shapes I'm going to add some little flicks. I'm starting in the smallest part of that seed shape and then just flicking my pen out quite gently with the pressure. So I'm not drawing a line, I'm starting with my pen on the tile and then just flicking it towards me and lifting it. And this hatching technique is quite fun, a fun one to do, especially on, I think, these seed shapes. It does look very effective in any tile that you have these seed shapes in. It's quite a nice way just to add a bit of drama to those shapes, but also just to kind of give it that definition and depth. Just be aware when you're coming up next to any of these umble ribbons that we don't accidentally draw into those auras, because that's going to be kept nice and separate and defined. I think there's all sorts of tangles you could place inside Fife. The spaces we have aren't the biggest, so you want something fairly, you don't want anything too detailed. If we didn't, I have placed striping in there before, which is a nice one. I think it would have been a bit much alongside the umble, so the Indyrella is interesting because of its texture. It's quite fun. Getting there with this hatching. My micron is getting a bit old, it's getting a bit scratchy, it feels. Just a couple more hiding there, so just an idea of the hatching on these ones. You might be able to spot ones I've missed. I can't see any, I don't think, so if I do, I will come back to them. But I'm going to cap my pen and just pick up my pencil now to start doing a little bit of shading. Just taking a second to go and sharpen my pencil because I felt it was a little bit on the blunt side. But here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is shade my umble. So I'm going to go fairly classic with that and just bring some pencil shade all around the edges of it to make it pop. I'm not going over the pen inky sections because I don't want to lessen the drama of that black. However, I am going over the aura lines where they overlap, because I want to make it appear as if these ribbons disappear behind each other and lift the ones on top A fun thing that you could do with Umble is to just have a think in a bit more detail in advance before you start placing them down. And if you started to, you might be able to make them interweave more if you drew part of one. And then maybe I'll do another video to sort of explain what I mean. But if you drew part of it, then you could kind of draw one underneath here and then another one would go over the top of that one. And then you could finish them off once you'd placed the others, and it would make it look like it was sort of interweaving a little more. That's an interesting technique I might actually put on my list to do a video of. Weaving tangles. There's a few that do it, a few that include that technique. So I'm just placing this, I think I'm going to shade each tangle one at a time and then go back in with my pencil to shade the next. So I'll start by finishing my Umble properly, and then I'll go back in and do the Fife and the Indyrella. The Indyrella I'll save till last because there's no point shading it first and then finding that when I shade the Fife on top of it, it all vanishes because it's going to have the Fife shaded. And the Umble, in fact, because it's obviously going on top of everything. So I think that's all of my Umble shaded initially. I've not actually gone over the top of some of these bands in a couple of places though. And we do want to make sure, whilst we want to retain that white, that we do go over it in places so that it does disappear beneath its neighbour. So I'm going to pick up my tortillon. This is a bit of a bendy one, but we'll manage. And then just soften the graphite, trying to keep it away from those ribbons unless it's where it's crossing, here for example. And as I'm not sure I've mentioned this yet in this video, but obviously I'm just turning my tile rather than moving my hand. So whatever is the most comfortable position for my hand, I'm going to leave it there and turn my tile to accommodate it. And that is the beauty, or one of the things that I like about Zentangle, because the format is so small. We can just swivel it rather than having to move ourselves. If I was doing this in a larger format, like a big A4 or a bigger piece of paper, I would have to kind of maneuver myself as much as the actual format itself. So it's quite nice and easy and helps us to relax when we're drawing. Do just be aware when you are rotating your tile that you're not going to be rubbing your hand over any of the graphite that you've placed, because it can smudge, it can get on your hand, and then you might end up with it in places that you were hoping to keep clear of graphite. It's good to be fairly heavy-handed with graphite and shading. I think one thing that I found when I first started was that it was hard. I didn't want to put too much graphite down. And there is a bit of a balance that you want to strike, because you don't want to make it super covered in graphite. You need to make sure you're retaining some highlights in your tile, but equally you want to be bold with your shading to give it that drama, especially when you're accompanying a tangle like this, where it is quite bold. Because having a deep shadow will really lift the tangle away from its background. I think that looks quite effective already. I'm going to come back to the Umble. I might add some more shading to it, but for now I'm going to shade my Fife. So I'm going to just add some more graphite on top of these little sections here where I've added the hatching into the seed shapes, and it will really... Oh, I missed a bit. There we go. It's a bit of Umble that I missed. There we go. You probably are all shouting at the video, you've missed a bit, and that will probably happen fairly often with my videos. I think it's easy to miss things, and then when you're watching it, because I've done it before when I've watched other people's videos, you think, oh, you've missed a bit, you've missed a bit. So obviously these ones here that disappear underneath the Umble, some of them we're just going to end up adding sort of an idea of the shade to, or they were already shaded because they've got graphite on them from the other pattern, so don't stress too much. There's a lot of graphite here already, but we'll just add a little more. This section here needs some, again there's already lots of graphite here. And then I'm going to just add some where each of my Fife petals sort of cross under and over each other to lift them. Just emphasise the over-under. There aren't there's not a lot of places that this is happening really, because we've got so many other things going on. But we'll just hide it behind. There's one here. Any more? Not that I can see right now, but we'll revisit it in a minute. So let's start to shade, or just to blend this graphite. So pressing it into the paper, and then it's hard to explain. I mean, I'm doing a rather different action from when I first start here and to what I do when I'm halfway up this petal, so it's much more of a, I like to say, tickle of the tile as we move up. So pressing it in to start with in little circles, and then just tickling it and encouraging it up into the whiter spaces in a lighter layer of graphite. So often with the Zentangle method, you'd start with your string and then you divide your tile up into different sort of sections and then place a tangle in each of those sections. But I just fancied doing something a little bit different. I thought that the kind of the boldness of the Umble would be best sitting on top. Even though traditionally it sort of does blend itself into the background the more layers you add. I quite liked it, the idea of the kind of the drama tangle up at the top, and then using Fife and Indyrella almost as the texture tangles behind it to sort of support it beneath. We're getting there, just blending. Done this side. Doing these little bits first. So just love the shading parts. Such a magical wand, this tortillon. And then one final little section here. Now, I think what I don't want to do is to add loads and loads of graphite, because there's quite a lot of graphite on here already. So I don't really want to add masses and masses to this Indyrella, because I think it's just going to end up looking like a big grey blob. So I think I am gonna shade it in the way that I shaded the mini tangle that I did before. And I think what I'm going to do is shade just along the inside where it kind of is next to this curved petal. Let's see how that looks. Kind of cool, I think. We might be able to add some white chalk to this and make it look really 3D. Just bringing it in alongside of each petal or seed shape. There's an awful lot of graphite going on in these corners here where the umble's crossing over. I think what I might do is just add some additional ink just to make some of the shadow a little bolder and help it pop out from the things we've already placed. I told you this would be a bit of a random make it up as you go along tile, which I do enjoy. I think it's fun to do that now and then. Just popping a bit of, smoothing out that graphite where I've placed it. I think that looks pretty cool. This probably look really cool on a tan tile actually, because you'd be able to really add some more highlights, especially to the Fife. I'm going to go and grab, I think I've got one here actually, a white chalk pencil, which I didn't have at the beginning of the lesson, but it's hiding in my little pouch here. And just see what happens when I add a little bit more of a highlight to the other side of these Indyrella. I don't think I'm going to need to soften it because sometimes the white does just work by itself quite well. You can add white, when you cross black ink is when white chalk works at its best on a white tile. So here I'm adding some just alongside that graphite, but on top of the Indyrella lines, but it might not show up so well in on the white tile here, the white of the Fife. It is an off-white paper, but it just doesn't really have the same pop. I'm going to add, what should we do? Should we do a little bit on one side of the umble maybe? I am just winging this. It's kind of effective, but as I said, when you're on a white tile, the white chalk really is at its best when you're going over the black ink, rather than just emphasising the white spaces like you can on a tan or a grey tile, or any other colour for that matter. But that looks kind of cool, I think, just a little bit of a oomph. And I think what I'm going to do is just come back in with my black pen and just go over some of these umble lines just to lift them, being really careful to preserve those white auras. And actually it might be effective if you had like a gel pen or something, just to ink some gel into those aura lines just so they really popped out. I don't have one to hand. I really like adding pen. I think it really does a good job of popping things out. Going back in with your pen at the end can really just emphasise things nicely that sometimes get maybe a bit lost or blurred when you're adding the graphite. And just tidy up in the areas that need it. It really just adds to that graphite, I think, just boosting the kind of the dark element, because the darker areas next to where you want the shadows to be deepest. It's like you're just adding a really, even though you're just sort of retracing the same line, just adding that deep black back in again. There we go. Quite pleased with it. Right, I'm going to just go and grab a white gel pen and see if I can boost those auras a little more. Okay, I've got a secure jelly roll. I'm going to quickly flip my tile over, just get the pen going. I don't want to get it on my table. And I'm going to just jump in and just boost those white auras either side of the umble. It thickens them up slightly. Yeah, that looks cool. And it also just kind of evens them out slightly as well. On some of these I do have thinner ones than others. And I think as a final touch I may just go back and boost those shadows as well. Or the lines that I've just done, but I'll go over them again. This is quite a nice way of just evening out these auras. This is a Jelly Roll 10, which is on the thicker side. You can have, I do have some finer ones as well, which would also work. I really like Fife on a black tile. It looks really cool. And actually Indyrella as well. I mean, anything. These are some of my favourites, I think. Umble I wouldn't describe as a favourite, but it was one I just sort of thought of. Sort of picked it out of a hat, as it were. Nearly there. Obviously, just be aware of these Jelly Roll pens taking a little while to fully dry, so try not to go over them with your hand. I do really like actually how this is coming together, especially with that little line of white chalk. It just makes it look slightly more rounded. Which is very cool. There we go. I am quite pleased with that. I'm going to just let it dry for a second before I flip it over, but I'm going to add my chop. Where shall I pop it? Down here. A little IC for Ivy's corner. Flip it over and sign it. There we go. I hope you liked it, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more Zentangle.